Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about some different art styles that have occurred from various time periods, and we'll be talking about specific art movements that have impacted visual design. So we've all heard about vintage design, right, and how we can incorporate that into our graphic design work or artistic work. But what exactly does that mean, right? Vintage can actually encompass a whole range of styles, various decades and various design genres. So we're just going to be talking about some popular design styles, so that way having a better understanding of them can help you to better seek inspiration for your design needs. So a few that I'm going to be talking to you guys about today are Victorian, Bauhaus, Art Deco, Midcentury Modern, and pop art. So I'm just going to be using Pinterest here because there are so many great images on Pinterest available to us, and some really great design inspiration. So what I did here was I started off by making a board just for Victorian branding. And I wanted to talk to you guys about what exactly the Victorian era was. How did it occur? What exactly is this Victorian style? So basically, the Victorian era really was named after the reign of Queen Victoria. This took place between 1837 to 1901, so about 63 years. Now, I don't want to spend too much time going into the history of it. I want to just more focus on the design aspects and design elements that were incorporated. But this is Queen Victoria who we're talking about. And even through these photos, you can kind of get a glimpse into that era. You can see how everything is really ornated, very decorative, right? So in this time period, almost every space was occupied, right? So right now, minimalism is in, having less. But in the Victorian era, it was the opposite of that, right? Every corner, nook, and cranny was full, was very decorative, very ornate. So that's really kind of the focus of the Victorian era. So I'm hopping into Victorian style here, and I just wanted to talk about a few key things, key parts of the Victorian style. Things definitely aren't bright and airy, right? Again, like minimalism. Things are very rich, very heavy. We see a lot of these dark jewel tones. We see the deep reds and blues and greens. Again, we see things that are very ornate, very heavy, even heavy on the wood accents. Everything is very highly decorative and very dark and rich, right? So that would definitely be one of the key styles when you're going for kind of like a Victorian look. We talked about the heavier and richer, the better, right? But all of these images kind of evoke a sense of warmth to them, right? So things that are opulent, things that are warm, things that are rich. A Victorian room and Victorian style, even in graphic design or art, again, it tends to be very almost like a comforting, cozy aspect despite being so heavily decorated. And again, that is because of a lot of those deep tones and that warmth that they were able to establish through all the use of gold and wood. We see a lot of patterns and texture and, of course, a lot of accessories and, again, warm lighting. So a lot of these aspects that we just spoke about, we spoke about kind of creating a sense of warmth. We spoke about opulence, right? Being very decorative, very heavy, right? Using all the space. That applies to design as well. So here we can see a beautiful example of a modern use of Victorian design. We see a lot of very ornate visual accents, ornate designs. Here we see the tentacles here kind of winding and following the shape of the text and filling all of that space. Here again, we see the same thing where we see these ornate frames, and then it's very busy inside, but it's organized at the same time, right? We're still using our design principles. We still have visual hierarchy applied here. But these are all really great examples of how kind of having some experience and understanding of the Victorian style can be applied to our design work. So again, we're thinking very ornate, very dark tones, right? And making the most out of our amount of space. So that's just a bit about Victorian. Let's go into our next style. Next, we're going to talk about the Bauhaus art movement. So this was a really, really intriguing art movement that began in Germany in 1919, and it actually started with a school that really, really focused on a geometric, abstract style. So the Bauhaus time period, the Bauhaus art movement, this really began in 1919 in Germany, where there was a school that was founded by an architect. He was named Walter Gropius. And he was really, really inspired by expressionist art. And with his leadership, he really wanted students, he really encouraged students to consider things like geometric and abstract styles. So things that didn't really have too much emotion to them, things that were a little more structured and rigid and geometric. So this style is really, really unique and considered really groundbreaking by a lot of designers. It's definitely been resurging, especially as minimalism has been coming into place. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of icons that are kind of similar to things that we're seeing here, right? Very minimalistic, simplistic shapes. So that's really the Bauhaus art movement. All right, so I just pulled up here a few quick examples of Mr. Walter Gropius here, the founder of the Bauhaus School. And here's some pictures of what that school looked like. Again, we can already kind of start to see some really clean lines and structure here. And something pretty interesting is Bauhaus actually stands for building house. So Bauhaus is German for building house. All right, so we're hopping back here into the Bauhaus art movement and the style that really came from the school. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on the history. Maybe that could be a later video, but hopping into the design aspects that go along with the Bauhaus art movement. So we see here a lot of really clean lines, right? Clean lines are definitely one of the most important characteristics of the Bauhaus style. Now, in addition, we see a lot of really simple, basic shapes. Very simple shapes, right? Nothing is too elaborate, nothing is too decorative. It's really kind of the opposite of what we just saw previously with the Victorian movement. So again, very simplistic and a lot of primary colors, right? We're seeing a lot of really bold reds, bold blues, bold yellows, a lot of primary colors incorporated and very prominent in these designs. So these are just some really great examples of the Bauhaus movement and what that sort of style looks like. Again, key focuses, simple shapes, very geometric, and a lot of clean lines. Next, we're going to talk about Art Deco. So this art style, this art movement really started gaining traction around 1910. And it first started appearing in France right before World War I. And it was really inspired by making things look expensive, right? So things were very ornate, making things look very high-end, making things look very luxurious and glamorous. And we can see this through a lot of these gold accents and these very, very extravagant designs. Now, we spoke earlier about Bauhaus, and we also spoke about Victorian era. And with the Victorian time, we saw things that were very ornamental, very decorative. And Art Deco definitely has some similarities to that. In addition, it has some similarities to Bauhaus, where we're seeing things that are very geometric, right? We're seeing some very clean lines. However, it's definitely pretty different from Bauhaus because Bauhaus was not meant to look super expensive or super extravagant. Art Deco, on the other hand, was, right? They wanted it to look very, very high-end. So again, it's ornate, but a little more modern in a lot of ways, especially, again, the use of geometric shapes. So I'm trying not to make this video too long, and I still have two more styles to cover, so I won't go over this one as heavily, but I hope you can kind of get a good idea of the key elements in Art Deco. Again, we see things that look expensive, high-end, but still keeping a lot of the geometric qualities and clean lines. Let's talk about the Mid-Century Modern era. So I know you all have heard about this one. It's very trendy right now. But basically, this was the period between World War II through the mid-1970s. So it really hit its peak right in the middle of the 20th century, which is why it's mid-century modern, right? And the modern part comes from the style's very futuristic nature. All right, so I'm bringing us here into more design visuals for mid-century modern, and you can see some pretty interesting things going on here, right? Like, for example, we're seeing a lot of organic shapes as well as more geometric shapes. So these two elements are kind of combined, right? We're seeing a big mashup of organic with geometric. We're also seeing things that have a lot of more subdued coloring, but kind of paired with some bright pops of color, right? So some are a bit more neutral, but again, we still have some bright, bold colors kind of mixed in sparingly, right? But a lot of this kind of like neutral beige in the background to kind of better balance it out. In these designs, we're seeing it's not super ornamental, right? Everything's actually pretty clean, pretty organized. We're not making use of every single like nook and cranny, every single spot in here. We're kind of balancing out these shapes with the content, with the information. So a few key takeaways here are we're seeing more simplistic shapes. We're seeing a combination of organic with geometric. We're also seeing pretty neutral color palette with a few exceptions of some bold pops of color. And we are seeing minimal ornamentation, right? So not a lot of super decorative elements, more focus on just those more simplistic, minimalistic shapes. And we've got one more era to go. That way we can wrap up this video. All right, and one of the best for last, in my personal opinion at least, is pop art. So my goal was to keep this video under 15 minutes, so I'm going to do my best to do that. We'll see at the end if I achieve that. But anyways, pop art movement did begin as a revolt actually against the more traditional views of art. A lot of young artists felt like the things that they've been seeing in art museums and the things that they were taught didn't really express themselves and didn't really express like their lives and the things that they're going through. So pop art really gained popularity in the 1950s. And some ways that you can really identify it is it does use a lot of images and characters that you might recognize. So for example, we've all seen that famous painting of Marilyn Monroe. So this is one of them. And then there was another very popular one done by Andy Warhol. So I'm scrolling here. Here it is. So this is like an example of some of his pieces. Campbell's Soup, right? We're seeing a lot of figures, a lot of characters, a lot of individuals that are familiar to us. So a lot of these pop artists were trying to create artwork that involved things that previous artists just tried to avoid, right? So things that were recognizable, things like comics or celebrities or, Coke bottles, bananas. Again, things that were just previously avoided. They weren't afraid to showcase these in a very bright, vibrant manner. So hopping into some modern pop art graphic design work here, again, we can see some pretty consistent trends, right? We're seeing a lot of bold colors. We're seeing a lot of bold reds and blues and yellows. So primary colors as well as just other bold colors. And this is a really beautiful example. But we're using colors that are very just vibrant, right? Which isn't necessarily something that we had seen in a lot of other styles and movements. We can see things that are kind of painterly, but we can also see things that look more like ink focus, some things that are like mixed media. But definitely the key focuses are their very distinct shapes and distinct, bold, bright, vibrant colors. And they're also kind of whimsical, right? Some of them are almost like parodies of these characters that we're familiar with. We're seeing a lot of comic book inspiration and influence. We're just seeing things that we didn't see in typical commercial art previously. Art was meant to be for the masses, right? Not just the elite. That was really their goals with this. All right, so I hope you guys found this video useful. Of course, there are so many more art styles and art movements out there, but this just covered a few really, really amazing and influential and inspirational ones. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.